My name is Suzanne Clary. I'm the president of the board of the Jay Heritage Center, and I'm thrilled to see you all here today, especially on this gorgeous, Sunday afternoon. You love nature, but you also love history, and history's winning right now. Before we start, I'd like to just mention a couple of our co-sponsors. I would love to have Francine Shorts and anyone else from the African American Women, and Gloria, I didn't see you. Welcome, stand up or wave, whatever you like. We have some friends. Oh, and Gwen. Oh, yeah, no. Members of our board, staff, just wave. I guess we'll just do waves. Volunteers. We have a lot of people that helped make this program possible. I don't see him here yet. He'll make some remarks at the end of the presentation. Dave Thomas. This event is also co-sponsored by the Friends of the African American Cemetery in Rye. How many of you have been to that cemetery? Okay, good. We'll try and familiarize people with it. It's on North Street in Rye, behind Greenwood Union Cemetery. And it's another historic site. And before you all leave, I hope you'll take one of these brochures that we have handy. This program is offered in connection with our being on the African American Heritage Trail of Westchester. There are 16 sites, but we believe there should be more, like the Skinny House, which you're going to hear about today. And they're all sites that really tell our whole history, not just one history, and a history that we all share. And Dave will give us a little information about that later. And the reason why, there are many reasons why this talk is so special to us. It's what they call Archtober. Okay, you'll see, like October, a lot of people celebrate architecture, which is our built heritage. You look out the window at the meadow, we have our natural heritage. Today we're talking about the Skinny House and cultural heritage. But by preserving buildings like this, preserving buildings like the Skinny House, we're preserving our built heritage. So this is a perfect talk to have during Archtober. So today we're going to hear from Julie and Deb Seeley, whose family not only built the Skinny House. I'm going to show you the book. We have copies of these that we'll be handing out afterwards to attendees. But their ancestors are also several interred at the African American Cemetery. And so there's this wonderful connection between these historic sites, the cemetery, our site, which is on this trail, and also the Skinny House. And we'll explore that a little bit more too. But I want to talk first about our wonderful guest speakers who are going to talk about their journey, genealogical journey, and architectural research journey too, which again, perfect for October. Dr. Seeley, Dr. Julie Seeley, graduated from Wellesley College and the Tufts University School of Medicine. I think we have some Tufts fans in the audience. Her early writing career focused on developing educational health materials for women. In 2010, she began writing about her grandfather's legacy, Nathan Seeley, and the famous Skinny House he built in Mamaroneck, New York. Her screenplay, Skinny House, won the Best Screenplay Award, Women's category, at the Fall 2021 Big Apple Film Festival. Bravo, it's amazing. It's called 10 Feet. 10 Feet, the Story of a Skinny House, a short documentary, won the Best Long Short Historical Documentary Award on the 2022 World Fest Houston International Film Festival. She is joined here by her son, Devereaux Nathan Sterrett, Dev for short? Yep. Yeah, okay. The great-grandson of Nathan Seeley, who built the Skinny House, graduated from George Washington University, and is a senior manager at an international cybersecurity firm. He's an avid movie buff and is working on his first screenplay. Dr. Seeley and Dev run Skinny House Productions just outside of Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. So we're very honored that they took the time to come all the way up here. They produce untold diverse family legacies, one story at a time, and it could not be a more perfect fit for our site. So please give them a round of applause and welcome to the
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We are very, very thrilled to be here, and I do hope that when everybody leaves today, that you'll go back home and look in the closets and find some of those cardboard boxes that are covered with dust, and you'll find some family photos that you can write about. These days, we know it's important to teach history in our homes and not rely simply on history being taught in our schools. I think people can hear me, but is that a little bit better? It's okay.
Great.
All right. So the story that I'm going to tell about this very odd-looking house is a story that I stumbled upon, basically. And yes, you can say, oh, well, you had a grandmother and a grandfather, and you had a father, and you didn't know this story? Well, as it turns out, we don't really understand what our parents and our grandparents went through. And we don't have the wisdom as kids, and sometimes even as teenagers, to ask the right questions. And yes, I still feel that I should have asked a lot more questions. And the way that I could rectify it was to pull out the boxes of memorabilia that my Aunt Shug left me and said, okay, I am ready to tell this story. I understand that there's going to be some tears, there's going to be some, wow, I didn't know. And I realized that it's important to involve my son and the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. So while you know where this house is, it's on Grand Street off of Mamaroneck Avenue in Mamaroneck, the village of Mamaroneck, and you may know that it is a funny looking skinny house. What a lot of people don't know is how and why the house was built, and that my grandfather had a dream with his brother, Willard, a dream that was kind of distracted, pummeled up, and thrown away by something that we couldn't control, and it's called the Great Depression. But it doesn't take away the inspiration that the legacy brings to me and to my generation and to my son's generation. But the bottom line is this is a story about a family, an American family, and I think that is the bottom line. Next slide. Okay, so you may drive down Grand Street in Mamaroneck, and like my mother, when she was engaged, my father said, okay, I'll let you see the house. So he put her in his old jalopy and he rode down Grand Street, and she said, well, where is it? He said, well, you passed it. And she was like, oh, can we go by a little slower so I can see it? So my father had some mixed emotions about growing up in a funny little house, and I'm going to tell you the story of why that occurred. But basically, it sits way back from the curb. It sits on a plot about 12 by 100. Deborah's going to tell you more details about the house. But on the right side, you can see the main house, which is the original house that my grandfather built, the custom-made house that he made for his wife, Lillian, my grandmother, in 1926. And so they built this wonderful house, and his business was thriving, and there was construction, and he was building houses in the village of Mamaroneck. And lo and behold, the Depression came and changed his direction and his plans. And so how he decided to build this strange looking house on this little tiny strip of land is what we're going to talk about today. And I think you'll find it's a very fascinating story. Now, when I started to think about writing this book, one thing that grabbed me, and I'm not even sure, I think there are some probably historians in here who say this wasn't the exact translation of Mamaroneck, but I love this description, the place where the sweet waters fall into the sea. And to me, it just means, in my brain, that it's a mystical place where good things happen and salty things happen. And I can say from my family's point of view, that is the combination of the history of the Skinny House and my family's history of Mamaroneck. Growing up, I loved Mamaroneck. I just thought the history of the Native Americans, the wonderful, diverse community that this place was, the entrepreneurship that flourished here, the proximity to New York City and the Harlem Renaissance, everything came together and made me think this is a special place. Even though I lived in Baltimore, way miles away, but every summer, winter, fall, holidays, I came and visited my grandmother in the Skinny House. And I came along the New York Thruway, and when I saw the exit 18, I knew. I got excited, and we would stop at the front door and wait for 5 minutes for Grandma to come down, but it was well worth it. Yes, these are my memories of the Skinny House, black and white photos. It tells you I am a little old, okay? However, but I remember skipping along this walkway and smashing green grapes. I know that anyone who grew up on Grand Street knew that there were a lot of grape arbors for winemaking, and also really making the neighborhood a community. And so the first central door is the door to the living room that you can see straight through the kitchen. The door on the side is the door to the attic, not the attic, the basement, basically. And we're going to take a look at that. But you can see, even in the black and white photo, my grandfather had an architectural bent. Sure, he only graduated from 10th grade, and yes, he was a carpenter, and he did teach himself how to do blueprints, but he loved nice looking things and he loved architecture. So I assumed that when he did build this Skinny House, even though it was built out of salvaged materials and leftover materials and mismatched windows, that he was going to make it the best little skinny house that he could. And next door is my aunt. This is the living room of the Skinny House. This is my Aunt Shug. I call her Aunt Shug because that's what her nickname was, believe it or not. And that is me and my brother Michael. We are standing next to the heavy oak furniture that my grandmother had in the Skinny House. You can see the slanted walls. There's a china closet, her homemade lace curtains, and right above that chair is a white box. And my grandfather, who was very inventive in his own mind, he made a compartment in the front facade of the house so that when the mailman came, he could open the door, put the mail in, and my grandmother wouldn't have to open the front door. She would just get the mail out of that compartment. What you don't see on the ceiling is that there is a compartment in the ceiling where he called his library, where he stored his workbooks for all the building that he did. But we'll see a little bit more of the house in the next slide. And because I first started to write about this story, Deborah, you can tell them how I came about writing the story.
Yeah, so when I was in third or second grade, my class had a project, tell the class about your family, and my mother actually went into our basement, dug around a bunch of old boxes, eventually found wonderful artifacts. You'll also be able to see it in the back room after the presentation, and we'll share it here. But it was a pamphlet that my great-grandfather, wrote up and distributed in order to convey the fact that he's building homes for African Americans coming up from the south to the north. And so we'll get into that. But one thing to do is thank you for going into those boxes, because had you not done that, we wouldn't have found those artifacts. We wouldn't have asked the questions about the story and then gotten to where we are today. So, yeah.
You can see this is a personal story, for sure. And one of the things I knew that would be very tough for me to write about is the fact that my father, you can see the self-drawn portrait that he did at age 14, that he gifted to his father. he had a tough time growing up in this house. He was only 10 years old, and that meant that he had to move from a regular size house to this 10-foot wide, 3-story, single family home. And he had some really, really tough days thinking about, he didn't understand what the Great Depression was. He just knew that his father lost his job, lost income, and they had to move. And so that's pretty much what my father's adolescence was like. You can see on his face. He was a studious, introverted, studied all the time. And he wasn't as outgoing as Miss Shook, Lillian, whose only dream in life was to be a Broadway star, an opera star at that, and that she felt that was the way that she dealt with life's challenges. So she sang all the time. And that allowed her to get through the family trauma. And in fact, I realized I did some research on that photo. I had not a clue that her mentor and teacher was Mademoiselle Pelia, from France, whose father was Charles Pelia, who actually was one of the fathers of the moving pictures in France. Who knew? And that's a famous portrait of her family. I found later online that someone had found boxes and boxes of her world travels, and it was just like my aunt to make the acquaintance of a very famous opera star, because that was her dream too. Absolutely her dream too. And that was her personality. And my grandmother's personality was just what you see. Roaring 20s. She learned to smoke, her hands on her hip. She was in front of her custom-built house. And like many women in America, they were part of the middle class. She was part of the burgeoning African-American middle class. And her husband had his own business. And he was building things, and she was staying at home, taking care of her 2 brainiac, talented children. And my grandfather, an early picture that we found of him, that was his personality. He was confident, and we understood that he spoke conversational Italian. He taught himself anything he needed to know. And you had to have amount of confidence in 1920s as an African-American man to start a business building homes with your brother. And so I had to think of them as characters, because if I thought too much about, oh, these are family members, I thought it was best for me to understand them as characters, and I can get to know who they were as individuals. And that has served us well for writing about them. So we want to talk about this, Deb?
Yeah, so here's the pamphlet that I referred to earlier. Was just sitting in a box in our basement. It's quite striking if you actually look at it and read through it. I'll just read a quick excerpt here from the first paragraph. The colored man's home. Every colored man needs a home. That statement does not require proof. It is the dearest wish of every individual, of every color or race, to have a clean, decent place in which to house his family, in which to bring up his children in peace and comfort. And again, we have the pamphlet in the back. We really want you guys to look at it and enjoy it. But that right there is quite the statements. And so it's remarkable. We brought that in when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, and she probably remembers most of what happened then because I was too young, but that's kind of the genesis of the story, or at least us putting the pieces together to tell the story to you all. So
yes. And this is not the story I knew growing up. My father, as I said, was an adolescent when this company was started. So he didn't understand what an entrepreneur was. And he didn't understand why it was so important for his father to do this company, to start this company. So fortunately, I will say the person I am most grateful to is my Aunt Shook, who decided to pack all of these boxes away with memorabilia. And one thing you should know about her, she was a detail-oriented person. She trained at Mamaroneck High School to be a commercial secretary, and most part of her career was being the secretary to the headmaster of the Pauling School. And you know, it's a small, small world. That meant that she labeled every picture. All of the awards that we got as kids, you know, not even my parents saved some of them, but my aunt did. And it's such a small world. When I went to school in Wellesley, I realized that my best friend's son went to the Pauling School at the same time that my Aunt Lillian was there. Small, small world. But I'm grateful that this was at the bottom of the box and kind of explained really that this story is more than just a family story. It's an American story. And this is really in print what that first Seeley Brothers brochure said. This is my grandfather. After he's had a stroke, you can see his right side is weakened and he's holding a pencil there. But it's important to notice, as my friend Sherry from Lincoln says, this is a double-breasted suit. And it's a double-breasted suit that my Aunt Shirk brought to him that day. And I would say that my grandfather, despite a stroke, never stopped aspiring to really build things. Even in his old age before the stroke, he had moved to Connecticut. He had bought a piece of land and he wanted a Seeley compound. That didn't materialize, but I can tell you that the inspiration that you have when somebody just never gives up is just phenomenal. One of the things I had to figure out, well, why in the world would two brothers in Mamaroneck, how did they get the idea that they wanted to have a company to build homes? Well, it wasn't too hard to figure out. My family subscribed to the Crisis magazine, which was the flagship magazine for the NAACP. And in that magazine in the 1920s were many, many, many articles about the migration and the traveling of African Americans coming up from the southern states to escape lynching, Jim Crow laws, and racism. And basically the article said, "Come north, brother. If you cannot live safely in the South, the jobs are here. Safety is more here than it is in the Deep South. Come north." And I am convinced my father sold the Crisis magazine as a magazine boy. My grandfather read these articles. It was the roaring 1920s. Anything is possible. Right next door in New York was the Harlem Renaissance. And as you know, Langston Hughes, who went to Lincoln University, who's a big part of this story, is considered one of the fathers of the Harlem Renaissance. And I would advocate everyone read about the Harlem Renaissance. It was a major influencer, I believe, for my grandfather. Anything is possible. That wasn't happening down south, but in the north, there was a lot of encouragement, aspiration building by the Harlem Renaissance to do anything you want to do, at least try. And fortunately, in Mamaroneck, you can do that. When I realized that this is more of a family story, I realized the Great Migration is a huge part of this story. If it had not been for the Great Migration, for people coming up looking for homes, then my grandfather wouldn't have a business. And basically it went like this. You know that Westchester has very affluent areas, and basically the history, as you know, of Mamaroneck is that this was a wonderful place to set up a home for all families, for artisans, for carpenters, for people who traveled into the city to be commuters. And basically around the commuter line, the community came up and up and up. And so this whole situation of the Great Migration was a reason that Mamaroneck, Chicago, places north and northwest had huge amounts of population that grew and grew and grew. And that means industry had to change, schools had to be built, jobs were available. And my grandfather said, if jobs are available, then if we have a lot of people coming up from the deep south, and they are working in affluent homes, but they have no place to live, or they have no place to go on a weekend, or the apartments are too expensive for them to rent, then we can help. And so that factored into why my grandfather's business did well for a while. I'm very grateful. This is, Dev can talk a little bit about this, but this is a courtesy slide by the American Institute of Architects, the New York chapter. We have presented there. They are the biggest chapter of the American Institutes, and they were fascinated about home ownership and African Americans during the Great Depression. And so they stumbled upon our story, and they were kind enough to put this map together to show some of the projects that the Seeley brothers were working on. We can just point them up.
Yeah, and we'll get into kind of the architecture of the actual skinny house here in a moment, but I want to talk about this guy next.
Well, there was another thing that I stumbled upon when I started writing the book. I am detail oriented too, and I started to look up names that came up often. And one of the names that came up often was Oscar Lee Warren. And Oscar Lee Warren served in the Land Records Department at Mamaroneck for many, many years. And he also was on the Seeley Board of Directors. And he also was involved in a lot of land transfer. I didn't know that he later went to Sing Sing because he was stealing clients' money, absconded to Turkey, sent encrypted messages to his secretary. He was a prominent Democrat and in the land office here. And so I said, he really took advantage of the Great Depression. And one of the things that I cite in the book, this is all public record in the local newspapers, is he stood before the judge and his attorney said, look, this is the Depression. Can you blame him? Basically. And so, yes, he served in Sing Sing. So that gave me pause to say, I'm not quite sure things were really above board when it came to this attorney and his interaction with the land office and interaction with the Seeley brothers. So I will continue that kind of research, but every story has a villain. We can all understand that the Great Depression, as you know, was a devastating time for a lot of folks, but you just don't know the ends to which some people went through to get by. And this is a sad story. Again, this is a confluence of why this story is valuable. And one of the things I have to admit is that when I was cleaning out the house of the skinny house with my mom and my father, I think I was in the first year of medical school. I can clearly remember my mother saying, you want this, you want that? And of course, my eyes went to the beautiful pottery and the crystal. And I remember her pointing to a box on the floor, and it had some of my grandfather's workbooks. And she pointed to it. She says, do you want those? I said, no. And, of course I regret that now, because I didn't have the foresight to understand. And yes, I have workbooks. But I would have a lot more. And so I just have to admit that was one thing that was a very hard lesson for me to learn, that sometimes it's not the shiny stuff that you want to keep or that will tell you the story. It's the yellowed pieces of paper or the draft documents. And so that's what I learned, basically. But that is why this story is valuable. Don't throw away old things until you know exactly what they are. pull them out on a Sunday afternoon at the dining room table so your kids can understand, what your grandparents went through. And the other thing is that ask, what were their dreams and aspirations? Had I really pushed my father to say, well, tell me about your father, and not just accepted his silence, I maybe would have learned more, and I actually would have maybe interviewed him about what his experience was as an adolescent growing up. I'll switch places.
Mhm. Yeah, so as you can see here, this is a original blueprint. I mentioned earlier, we also have the blueprint in the room in the back. It's really remarkable. It's in great shape. If you look closely enough, you can definitely see the blood, sweat, and tears that still exist on the document. Nathan Seeley signed it in several places. He was both the architect, the designer, sourced the materials. So this very much was a result of his ingenuity from top to bottom. The structure itself, we have some photos. We can give you a better perspective of the side of it and everything in just a moment. But given that it's so tall, he had to reinforce the building with railroad ties, which is a very unconventional way of doing things. Basically, a lot of the material that was used was scrap material. So nothing was, kind of consistent in terms of the design and layout, which you'll see here in a moment. So this is a side profile view, and as best as we could kind of get it, it's very hard given the narrow nature of the plot of land to get good perspective photos. But it kind of reminds you of Lego blocks, that kind of thing we used to play with when you were younger. And you can see the mismatched sizing of the windows. Basically, he just took what he could get and built a house out of it. And we were also lucky to get the Mamaroneck Historical Society to signpost it, mark it as a landmark, and really help tell the story even broader. And there have been visitors, it's really reached a global audience. There have been visitors across the globe who have stopped by and, marveled at the wonder of the Skinny House. I mentioned earlier, there were railroad ties used to anchor the home. Given, winds and storms that could arise, you had to have a way to kind of anchor it down. So you can see the yellow circle there is where there was a gable and then connects to a longer railroad cable down to the bottom. So that's the kind of lengths he had to go to ensure it, it was structurally resilient. And there's a close-up of the railroad tie that was used. So, yeah, smart idea, but have to do what you have to do. And so what you're seeing here is basically the Rock of Gibraltar, what we're coining or naming it, because the whole area is kind of a quarry area. So there's a lot of hard rock that you can either dynamite it, blow it up, and or you can build around it. And so that's obviously what we did here. So this is the basement of the Skinny home, and
Zida Santangelo, the longtime fan of the Skinny House. He and her family lived for generations next door, and that's my mother, my sister, and myself. And he was in a dilemma. What are we going to do? Should I blast this rock? And it took him a few weeks to figure he will accept it and go around. Sometimes, and there are lessons in the story. Sometimes you have to go around the obstacle. And so that is a very, very important lesson for me. And we talked earlier about on Shook's dreams and aspirations. She saved all of her programs. She saved all of her program songs. And as you can see, She played at the Fisher Hall concert, and this may have been her debut. I can't remember, but you can see Milda Pulia made suggestions about a program. And one of the things that's very, very important for me to really, I had no idea. Lincoln University came into this story first because of the Harlem Renaissance. Langston Hughes was considered one of the fathers of the Harlem Renaissance. Where did he go to school? Lincoln University in Chester, Pennsylvania, and graduated in 1929. Okay? And so I said, well, why did my father want to go to school? He had a father who had a business. Back then, as you know, father passed skills down to sons. And back then, you sent away for correspondence courses to learn skills. And his father said, I can teach you how to build houses. You're pretty good. I'm pretty good. And my father said, I want to go to school. I want to go to college. He was a national scholar, Mamaroneck High School. And he said, where do you want to go? Well, he looked, where do you think the magazine? In the back of the Crisis magazine were the articles and the ads for the HBCUs, the historically black colleges. So he said, I want to go where Thurgood Marshall went, Lincoln University, because I want to be a civil rights attorney. And Thurgood Marshall graduated in 1930 from Lincoln University. So my father's only dream was to go to college. It was very disappointing to my grandfather because he thought he would have a son who would stay and take over the family business. So my father didn't have, even though he was a star at the Mamaroneck High School, he had to teach himself geometry. So he got the Popular Mechanics magazine, sent away for a correspondence course. He passed it in geometry, and he got into Lincoln University. And Lincoln University has a storied history of very smart. It was not co-ed for until 1970, something like that. And these were the brightest kids on the East Coast. And yes, we have a lot of memorabilia, not here today, but my father did save a lot of memorabilia from Lincoln University. So when I found this circulating online, I said, oh, doesn't he look, isn't that my dad? And so I wrote to Temple. They own the photo because it's by a famous photographer, John W. Mosley. And he went around to the historically black colleges and took photos of all the social events. And the social events were social events. And so I said, look, Lincoln is such an important part of this story. I'm going to write about these group of guys, not in the physics class, but in the debate team. And as you know, Thurgood Marshall had a wonderful history in Lincoln University with the debate team. And that they won international awards for debate. And so when I saw this, again, my father has never mentioned, by the way, I was the salutatorian of the class. Well, Einstein came to visit. He came to visit because he was an authority in physics. And also because he believed in equality and diversity. And while he got other awards from many other colleges, he thought it crucial to come to an African American college that had the best academic minds. Julian Bond's father was the president one time, Langston Hughes, and I can go on and on and on. But my father was an academic in his brain. And I remember growing up and he would sit hours translating Russian textbooks for math. So when I saw this, it surely does look like Einstein and him are having a conversation. And I can tell you that's my father. Challenging some theory, idea. We never won any arguments. with my dad. But I can tell you also that the standards that these gentlemen, these students were held to were very high. I have a copy of the student handbook that they were given in freshman year. Incredible. But some of them got drafted. And so while they went in 1941 or whatever, they left for 2 or 3 years and came back. Well, my father didn't graduate in 1947. So the next book would be about this storied, it will be about Lincoln, about my father's journey, and had he not gotten a college education and go on to teach mathematics forever, I don't think I would have really gone into the sciences, become a physician. And really goes back to his father excelling in something. If you don't know it, you teach it yourself, or you go to a correspondence course. We go online now to do that. But the point is, no one hands it to you. You learn it yourself, you can become an expert, and you can do it. And so I think I have permission for Temple to use this in the next book. And you can see, look at these young faces. They are the brightest of the bright. And this is where my father was the most happiest, being an academician and asking questions. And my brother went to MIT and Stanford. Go figure. Deb, you can handle this.
Yeah. So, a couple of things we wanted to leave you all with. First is a question. Who will tell your story? So the definition of legacy: a gift by will, especially of money or other personal property, a bequest or something transmitted or received from an ancestor or a predecessor from the past. Again, it's just kind of crazy for me to think back, had my mother not dug up those artifacts, asked the questions, asked more questions, and then more questions, met with historians and done all of that, I would not know this story, and I wouldn't have a story to pass on to my children and hopefully their children. So I guess the point is, most of you probably have that 1 or 2 or 3 artifacts in your basement, in your attic, and especially for the younger folks here, ask questions. Start to put the pieces together and build the story around those heirlooms, and you can have a full picture of what your grandparents and great grandparents went through. A lot of the lessons and struggles are super relevant to today. When I think back on the economy and social issues, and so the story is really relevant to today. It's kind of eerie in that sense. So ask questions, tell your story, and thank you all for listening. Okay.
We'd like to take a few questions, and then we will have a reception and a book signing. I'd also like to ask Dave Thomas to come to the front of the room. I mentioned him at the beginning of the talk. Dave, can you come on in? He is the president of the Friends of the African American Cemetery in Rye.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, you have 3 incredible preservers of history and legacy right here. I love, Deb, what you said at the end. That's so incredible. Dave, do you want to say a couple remarks?
Just some short remarks. Welcome to the Friends of the African American Cemetery. Since you are descendants, you're automatically in.
Oh, great.
The seal, there's a headstone at the African American Cemetery that is David Seeley. And I've cleaned that stone many times. And I've always wondered, because we know they're related to several other families and several other living descendants. So I've always wondered, gee, I've never met a Seeley. Now I have. So I expect you at the next meeting. It's Veterans Day. We're at the cemetery. Everybody please come by. This story reminds me so much of what I hear from the descendants, what I hear from my own family, and what I've gone through. There's tremendous, tremendous success in America, in Americans, in African Americans, in all Americans. No matter what your race, creed, or color, we have success, but we also have hardship. And we always overcome the hardship. And that's what this story's about. Taking something that people cast aside and building something that is special. And I look at that home, and we have a housing shortage in the United States today. We can build skinny houses. And there are plenty of people who don't have a home that is not the same. I mean, you know, and we owe it to this man who never gave up, who said to himself, I'm not letting this define me. I'm not letting this destroy me or send me into depths of despair. I'm going to use this, I'm going to make something of it. So, thank you. This was an amazing talk. I'm glad you're all here. I'm sorry I missed the beginning, but maybe I'll come back again. Thank you very much.
Questions for Julie and Deb about their journey? Any questions in the audience? Yeah,
Well,
Anthony.
your grandparents' first home was also on Grand before the skinny house?
Oh, next door. Yes, next door. Can you imagine waking up every day and seeing the
Going next door, I missed, I read that online, this is more,
Can you imagine?
no.
Yeah, and that was the tough part. You know, every day waking up and saying, we used to live in the regular side.
Is the house still standing on Grand? I think it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's still a private home.
You're right.
And it's not open for touring, but you can drive by, and the new owner is exceptionally supportive. And when it's springtime, we'll put out some flyers there about the history. People like that.
Nice, thank you.
We met April.
Oh, yeah.
Great.
I love you.
My question is, how many owners have owned the home that you
Well,
know
my
of?
grandfather owned the home in 1982, 3 or 4. My father, who didn't have wonderful memories about the home, decided to sell it to the Santangelos next door against, the wishes of the family, but he didn't. So the Santangelos owned the home, and then April would be the third owner. I will say that I made a bid to buy the home. That did not work out. So I have committed myself to preserving the legacy.
Dr. Seeley, do you know about your grandfather and how he came to live in Mamaroneck? Was he born there or?
He was born in Orange County, New York, and the reason he came to America is to get married in 1915. And I think that was because his brothers were here, Lester and Alonzo and Willard, and they decided to put their heads together for business. And because it was such a diverse community of immigrants, of African Americans, and it was actually affordable to live here. And the thing that you should know is that Willard and my grandfather bought land as early as 1920 at the land auctions because it was inexpensive, because it did tend to flood a little bit. So they were able to buy it at good solid prices, and they were able to raise their families here. And so, yeah, we think he was not born in Mamaroneck, but he grew here, and he raised his family here. He was married here. I have a check from the Bank of Mamaroneck that they took out a loan, all those kinds of things they saved. But it was a wonderful, diverse community. And as that commuter line grew and grew and grew, it became more diverse.
What year did your father graduate from Mamaroneck?
Let's see. I should know this, I'm pretty much sure. Let me see. He went to Lincoln in 1941, so 1939.
Okay, because my grandfather grew up with your grandfather.
Okay, what's your name?
Yeah, Isaac.
Okay, well, you know, Keith and I go back way.
Yes.
I will say, Keith Yiser, the Yiser family has been a long-term supporter of the story. And I will say, Keith was really responsible for me being at the dedication of the
mural.
mural on Boyd Street. He really spoke up to the committee and said, you have to invite Julie. So I'm very grateful to your family. You've been a long-term supporter.
Yeah, my family, my grandfather, they lived on the other side of Grant Street.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it's right on 39 Grand, right across from there.
Okay.
Well, White Plains Road.
Any old pictures?
Oh, you got a lot of old pictures.
Yeah.
Yes, we have a lot of old pictures.
Okay.
I'll see, my brother passed away in 20, and he had a lot of that stuff. He had a lot of the history.
We would love to
Everything
see.
else. If I can find it, whatever, I would definitely pass it on to Sue.
Thank you. We are updating the book. We have done some more research about the lineage of the family, and I can be more detailed about history, which is very important. I am not a historian, and I don't think we need to be to appreciate how history affected our families. But we should know enough so that we can tell our kids how it's important for them to do the research. We have no excuse. We can do research online. Lincoln has a wonderful archive section, and to be honest, if you can get hold of an archive section anywhere, you can write and tell your story. One thing should know is that the Smithsonian Institute, when they opened, they wanted this pamphlet. There are very few artifacts about northern businesses existing solely for the reason of helping African Americans in the South. And so next door, we have the live artifacts. Feel free to browse and look at them. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's it. That sounds great. Thank you.